everybody. All right, welcome back. So today I'm just going to do a quick recap of this conversation that we had the other day around this topic of love versus manipulation. And if you guys have any questions or want to talk about this in more detail, you can certainly reach out to me. And I'm happy to talk with you about it. And then also, of course, if you want to talk more about how we show up in relationships and how you show up in relationships and how to make things run smoother for you, we've got all kinds of resources coming up for that as well in the coming month. But I want to talk for a minute about this idea of love and also manipulation, which is kind of seems like a strong word, but I think it's something that we all do. We learn it from the times that we're little kids, right? How to manipulate our parents into buying us the candy or into getting out of a consequence or something. And so we learn how to get what we want in the world from the time we're little, right? Little kids learn to tell lies so that they don't get in trouble, right? And it kind of reminded me of this quote about have you heard people say like love, like the opposite of fear is love or something like that? And maybe that's a little bit of a cliche, and I don't know if I necessarily even 100% agree with it, but that thing about fear being the opposite of love, it made me think about manipulation. And why do we slip into manipulation tactics? And we're going to talk about that in the next, page here. But I think that the main reason is fear. Fear is the reason that we do this. And it can be so sneaky, right? And I'll talk about the ways that we manipulate. People pleasing is one of them. And so this is actually the podcast that I was listening to was Brooke Castillo's podcast on love versus people pleasing. And I had to write these points down and share them with you because honestly, this is something that it didn't quite click for me how all this stuff worked until I really listened to her lay it out. And I could see how in my own life, I will slip into manipulation tactics, telling a little lie because it seems nicer than just telling the truth, or people pleasing so that people see me in a certain way, so we manipulate perspective. First, let's talk about love. Let's talk about what is unconditional love. And I want to read you this quote, excuse me, from Brooke's podcast, the way that she described it. She says, unconditional love is fierce for yourself. It's honoring what you want for yourself, and it's telling the truth to yourself and to the other person, excuse me, and then allowing that truth to live with any response that happens and just loving them anyway. So that's unconditional love. And the thing about unconditional love is that truth is a requirement. And so I never really quite understood that. Why is truth a requirement for love? And I know that lying to someone or even people pleasing someone, which is a form of lying, right? You're not showing them who you really are. You're showing them a facade, a fake. And that's not truth, right? But can you love someone and people please them? And is that incompatible? And I really started thinking about this. And the thing about truth and why it's so required is because without the willingness to just tell the truth to ourselves and someone else, we slip into manipulation, which is not love. And so whether that's people pleasing or telling a lie, or maybe it's even being really pushy or argumentative, no, you have to do this, or threatening someone, right? Well, if you don't do what I want, then, we're not going to be friends anymore, or we're not going to be in a relationship anymore. And so we can use like emotional manipulation. We can use sex. We can use our relationship status. We can use all kinds of things as a way to manipulate people into doing what we want. You guys all remember what it was like in kindergarten, right? When you'd say, well, if you do that, then you're not invited to my birthday party anymore, right? Like that's when we learn manipulation, right? Well, I'll just use my birthday party as leverage to get this person to do what I want. And so we learn it at such a young age and we carry it into adulthood. And I think it just can be a really sneaky thing that can slip into our relationships and cause a lot of tension and toxicity. And so I think it's something to watch out for. Figure out, where do you do this? Where does your partner do this? And how can we get back into love? And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So we know that truth is required because without it, we slip into these manipulation tactics, which are dishonest. But the other thing is that without that capacity and that willingness to tell ourselves the truth about who we are, about what we want, about what our needs are, what our preferences are, we cannot ever fully honor and love and respect ourselves as our authentic selves. You can't ever really have that sense of self-identity, and you really can't even know yourself. There's so many things that it's like that. It reminds me a little bit of that movie, Runaway Bride or something, where she like didn't even know what kind of eggs she wanted because she spent so much time people pleasing her fiancés and her lovers that she didn't even really ever give herself the time and space to truly explore and be honest and truthful about who she is and what she wants. And so I think that's really important, because otherwise, if we aren't telling ourselves the truth and if we're just people pleasing and lying to ourselves and living a life that's not authentic, that's when we start to harbor toxicities inside. And this can include resentment, it can include anger, it can include disappointment, depression, anxiety, all kinds of stuff. And I think a lot of it comes from this manipulation of reality, and we're not being honest with ourselves and we're not being honest with other people. I want to talk a little bit about, again, that quote, Brooke talks about unconditional love. She says it's fierce. So it's not easy. It's easier to people please. It's easier to tell a lie, and not have to deal with the conflict or the fallout. And so really being willing to tell yourself and someone else the truth it requires courage. And it can be a really scary thing to do, especially if you've got a habit of people pleasing your whole life and just go with the flow. You don't want to be high maintenance or that girl, that's needy or demanding. And so out of fear of those things, we cave, and then we're not being true to ourselves. The important part about her quote that I love is that last part, is it's not just about honoring yourself and telling the truth for yourself, but it's also allowing that truth to live with any response that happens and then loving that person anyway, right? And so that's really important. So when you speak your truth and say, you know what, I don't actually want to take you to the airport, Mom, or whatever, to your son. I think that was the example she used in the podcast, was taking her son to the airport. And it's like, what if that person loses it? It was like, well, I took you to the airport last time and blah, 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 and you're not being a very good family member. Who knows? Whatever could happen, right? They can guilt trip you. They can tell you all the stuff. What do you mean you won't help with my charity event? Like, I know you're not working right now. It's the middle of COVID. You've got all the time in the world. And they might want to force you to justify your answer, your truth. And that's the part where unconditional love comes in, because you're loving yourself by standing up for what you want and what you need. And you're going to love that other person and just say, yep, I totally understand. You're not going to turn into manipulation or lie and tell oh, well, actually, I have this other thing going on. You're not going to do that. You're just going to let your truth be there. And however they respond, you just love them unconditionally. Yep, I understand. You have, they get to act however they want to act. They get to receive that truth however they want to receive it. And we're not going to try and control whether their response is good or bad or, easy for us to swallow. And so these are the 3 questions that she posed, right? This is the first is, do you love yourself enough to tell the truth in the first place about how you're feeling, about what you want, what you need, who you are, Will you love yourself even after you have said your truth out loud and then deal with any consequence or repercussion of that truth? And a great example of this is, as a queer person that grew up in a extremely fundamentalist Christian home, Christian family, I was closeted for my entire life almost, until my early 30s. I never talked to my family about the fact that I'm gay, because I had told myself the truth, and even that took me a long time, right? I really had buried a lot of my sexual identity and preferences, and I just really didn't, was pretty asexual. I didn't date, because I just wouldn't go there with myself because of all the indoctrination. And so there was that component of telling myself the truth. But even after I was telling myself the truth, I wasn't telling my family the truth. Again, because of fear of how they would respond. Am I not going to see my nieces and nephews anymore? Like, I've heard stories of this, right? Where family shuts people out. And so I wasn't telling them the truth. And so that's something to consider. Will you love yourself enough to, even after you have said the truth, hey, I'm gay, just so you know, what if the worst should happen? Are you willing to value yourself and your self-worth and your truth? Are you willing to value love, self-love, and truth enough to accept any repercussions? How highly will you value it? And then the third question is, will you love that person no matter how they respond? Right? When my brother found out, one of my brothers gave me a call on the phone just to make sure that I knew that, I heard, this news, and just, I'm really disappointed, and homosexuality is a sin, and da-da-da-da, and just called to make sure I hadn't forgotten, So again, that's unconditional love, right? How am I able to just allow him to have his experience of my truth and not have to manipulate it, not have to argue or push or have a big fight, not have to people please or make up a lie, just to allow him to experience that and have his own experience of that and to love him just the way he is. That's pretty powerful stuff. And the important thing to note here is love doesn't just mean that you have to accept abuse or you have to accept someone yelling at you or cussing at you or putting you down. You don't have to accept someone that's treating you poorly, right? You get to love them and say, oh, wow, I love you so much. We're not going to do phone calls anymore, right? Or you get to draw a boundary. You get to leave a relationship if that's what's necessary. You can totally be in love and say, this is what's best for me and I think it's what's best for you. And so I love you and goodbye. You get to say, I love you and here's the new parameters and the new boundaries. You get to say, I love you and I'm having a hard time understanding where you're coming from right now. Do you mind if we sit down and maybe have some coffee and talk about it? There's so many ways that we can address what comes up, but we can always do it from a place of love and from a place of truth and honesty and authenticity so that we don't have to slip into manipulation.